Welcome to everybody. So I am very pleased to have this opportunity to deliver a course on the subject the end of carbon, which is really a subject of actuality today. My name is Christian Guérit. I am engineer and economist. I spent all my business career in Total Energy Group in the field of economic studies and new business development. And my two last positions were positions of managing directors of two affiliates of the group in France and in the Netherlands. I am retired now. I've been retired since 2010, and I am a member of TPA. TPA means Total Professors Associate, and it is an association, a non-profit organization, which objective is for retired people from the group and also some active people to share their professional experience with students like you, and to deliver courses, lectures in their field of specialty. And this is exactly what I will do today, this afternoon with you, because I am well informed, and I would like to share my experience in the field of the world of energy in the global economy. So the subject today is the end of carbon, and maybe Alfred, I can start to share the diapo.
Yes, you can proceed.
Okay. Can you see it? It's okay? Can you see it?
It's coming up. Yes, we can see it. We can see it.
Okay, very good. So I am starting. So the end of carbon. Briefly, this will be the agenda. The subject is rather dense. There are a number of slides, but I will not comment all the slides. We'll start by a basic principle of climate change, then the world of energy, present and scenarios for the future, then some words of general features of renewable energy. We'll have a talk on the question of intermittency, which is a characteristic of renewable energy. And then we'll go through the various type of renewable energy sources in more detail, but not spending too much time either. We will make a focus on the criticality of mineral resources, because you may know that to develop a good energy transition, in particular in the wind energy sector and the solar energy sector and the electrical vehicle, there will be a need, more and more important need for mineral resources. So the question of access to these resources is at stake. So we'll say a word about it. Then just a few words on the dismantlement of equipment. We'll have a zoom on nuclear energy, which also is an important part of the energy mix, with the advantage that nuclear energy do not emit any CO2 in the atmosphere. We'll talk about the mobility, transport sector. We'll talk a zoom on hydrogen. I will skip it because within 1 week time, I have another lecture on specifically on this item. We'll say a word on the question of subsidies, and also we will end the presentation by some economic features where we'll talk about the competitivity of renewables, and we'll terminate by some conclusion. So climate change. It is important to remind that the combat of against climate change today is part of the main sustainable goals, which have been defined by United Nations in their 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And they are, among all these aspects, evidently a number of links between the subject of climate change and other subjects which are dedicated to the society development and the good wealth of the human being. So when we talk about climate change, there is an indirect link with the achievement of no poverty in the world, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, sustainable cities and communities, and responsible consumption and production for various kinds of products. So the climate actions are connected with all these elements. The carbon, the CO2 molecules and carbon molecules, obviously they raise a certain number of problems in connection with the increase of temperature in the atmosphere worldwide. But it's important to mention that carbon molecule is vital for the human being, for the life on Earth. It starts with the photosynthesis phenomena, where you have all the plants, thanks to the energy coming from the sun, which are absorbing CO2 and H2O and water, and they emit carbohydrates and oxygen. The second aspect is another one that we, as a human being, we know very well, connected with the respiration phenomena, where thanks to our internal engine, we create energy in our body by eating food, and this is there is a thermodynamic reaction in our body where when we breathe oxygen, we burn the carbohydrate that we are eating, and we reject CO2 and H2O. And the third phenomena is the phenomena of fermentation, where all the organic materials are decomposed into CO2 and CH4, CH4 being the methane. There is another cycle which is illustrated here, which is a cycle of carbon and the formation of hydrocarbons, which is a result of decomposition of organic materials. And after millions and millions of years, that has generated oil and gas field and coal fields, which are now used by the industry to create important amount of energy sources. The point is that to create this energy, we have to burn this fossil energy, and that result into the emission of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we are talking here about anthropic emissions. Anthropic meaning that these emissions are coming from the activities, the human activity. You have here a small figures which is showing the evolution of the CO2 content in the atmosphere, and you can see that the CO2 content has increased quite a lot since the year 1750, where we started at the level of 280 ppm. ppm means part per million, and we are now at the level of 420. I will come back in more detail about it. We are also to know that when we talk about energy flows start in the operation of our own body, and maybe it looks a bit surprising, but you see the power which is developed by a normal person is 250 watts when you are climbing 3 floors. And the daily need for an active person without specific effort is 120 watts. So you just 2 or 3 lighting device. You see, it's very low compared to industrial business machine like agricultural tractor, which corresponding power is about 150 kilowatts, and not to talk about steel rolling mill with corresponding power of greater than 100 megawatts. Let's have some comment about the greenhouse effect. Anybody, when its temperature is greater than 0 degree Kelvin, is emitting radiation. The sun and the earth emit radiation. So radiation emitted by the sun, you have 70% of this radiation which are arriving on Earth. Earth is warm, and then Earth is also emitting radiation. Some of them rebound within the atmosphere. Some of part of it is going out. And thanks to this atmosphere, you create a natural heat in the atmosphere. And thanks to the atmosphere, we have a natural greenhouse effect, which consequence is to have an average temperature on Earth in the range of 15 degrees Celsius. If we didn't have any atmosphere, the temperature on Earth would be minus 17 degrees, and it would not be possible to live on Earth. So thanks to the atmosphere, we can have life on Earth. Regarding the global energy flows, this slide illustrates the various flows. So you have many kind of flows, and we will focus on what is on the right-hand side here. The surface radiation coming from the Earth is about 390 watt per square meter, and this is a unit which is used, watt per square meter. And we have 235 watt per square meter, which are going out in the space, and that represent outgoing long wave radiation. And the difference between both represent more or less the natural greenhouse gas effect, which is amounting to 155 watt per square meter. And on this slide, you can find again the effect of this natural radiation of 155 watt per square meter, which is mainly due to the water vapor, to greenhouse gas, including CO2. CO2 is an important part of it, and clouds. Now, since the Industrial Revolution, this amount has a bit increased by an amount of 2.8 watt per square meter. And it is due to the human activity and the development of the industry in the world during the last centuries. And out of this 2.8 watt per square meter, you can see that majority of it is due to CO2 energy, to the industry in deforestation, but you have also the impact of ozone, oxide of nitrogen, and methane. This various greenhouse gas effect, you have three main greenhouse gas effect, carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O. They are all bringing negative effect in terms of increase of temperature, in terms of greenhouse effect. And it's important to notice that the lifetime year for all these three elements are not the same. So the most important is nitrous oxide with 114 years. Methane is 12 years, and carbon dioxide is greater than 100 years. And it is useful to compare the effect of these different greenhouse gas by the global warming potential, which is which is a reference for carbon dioxide. And you can see the most important is nitrous oxide. Methane is 28, but the quantity emitted by all these two other greenhouse gas are much less than the CO2 effect. An important thing to keep in mind regarding this greenhouse effect is the fact that you see in the atmosphere, which is mostly composed of oxygen and nitrogen, as you know, the percentage of carbon dioxide is very, very low. It's roughly 0.04%. So, but despite the fact that the quantity in terms of content is very, very low, a small increase of this concentration of this content can have very important effect in terms of increase of temperature. And as I recall, we had in 1750 280 ppm for the CO2 content, and we are now. You see the measure here is very recent, June 2024, coming from the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. We are at almost 430 ppm, and this increase has a very important effect on increase of temperature. This is the evolution of greenhouse gas emission coming from the human activity. So you can see that during the last decades, we have increased constantly this effect. And it is expressed on the vertical axis in terms of a billion ton of CO2 equivalent. You can see the most important effects are coming from the fossil energy, coal, oil, and gas. You have also a small part coming from cement and flaring. The use of forest and land has also an impact. The methane in green is important, and you have also additional effect for nitrous oxide and fuel gas. The important thing is to see that we had a permanent increase of this emission of greenhouse gas worldwide. Now, if you are remembering some lessons you had at the college when you were a teenager, when you were 14 years old, there is a very close link between the emission of fossil energy and between the combustion of fossil energy and the emission of CO2 in the atmosphere. In fact, in average, for the year 2023, we have emitted almost 35 billion tons of CO2 in the world, which represent about 3 tons of CO2 per ton of fossil. So you have a very simple correlation between the fossil energy consumption and the emission of carbon in the atmosphere. The effect is obviously an increase of temperature. You have here a graph from IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change, where you can see that we are constantly increasing the increase of temperature in the world compared to the situation before the industrial revolution, that is to say, before the year 1800, for instance. And if we are, for the time being, on a cumulative basis in 2023, the increase of temperature has reached about 1.3 degrees Celsius, and it is clear that we cannot continue in this trend, otherwise the humanity will have big problems. So this is a scenario. These are scenarios developed by IPCC. The effect is very much visible, for instance, on the impact on a Greenland ice sheet, as you can see on this slide. It has also an impact regarding the global sea level rise, which is increasing on a regular basis, so which can, on the long term, raise a lot of problems for certain islands and certain countries which have built their economy based on the sea. And we don't have to forget the so-called feedback effects, because the increase of temperature connected with the CO2 emission, they generate also water evaporation, effect on cloud formation. They are also generating melting of permafrost in the northern regions in the planet, melting away of sea ice and snow covering land, which create lower albedo and creating less reflection of sun energy. And you have also the Arctic declining sea ice. So these are what are called positive effects, which in fact have a negative consequences on the overall climate change situation. This is an illustration of the emission of CO2 during one day, 93 million tons added per day to the atmosphere. And you can recognize here the Manhattan and New York City. So the challenge is very, very great because since the beginning of the story, you see, before the year 1820, we had very almost zero emission of CO2, anthropic emission of CO2 in the atmosphere. If we are looking at the cumulative amount, including fossil fuel combustion, cement and industry, flaring, forest and land use, we have at the end of 2022, we have emitted on a cumulative basis 2,600 billion tons of CO2 until the end of 2022. And if we are, obviously, it's of prime importance to cut off this trend, to reverse drastically this trend. And the challenge is enormous, as you can see here, because if we are willing to respect the maximum increase of temperature of 1.52 degrees, we need, in fact, to emit on a cumulative basis in the future something like 400 billion tons of CO2 over 80 years to get the 1.5 degree objective. It's more flexible if we are talking about 2 degrees Celsius, because we have a budget, so-called budget, CO2 budget of 1,250 billion tons of CO2. So you can see on this diagram the enormous challenges which humanity is facing. So now let's talk about the world of energy and look at the present situation and scenarios for the future. One important element that has to be taken into account également also is the increase of population number, the demography, on which nobody has a real control so far. And you can see on the graph on the right hand side that we were in 1960 3 billion people on Earth. In 2002, 6 billion. We reached 8 billion last 1.5 years ago, 8 billion people, and projection are 9 billion plus, almost 10 billion in the year 2050. And obviously, all this increase of the population must be able to feed all these people and also to bring energy to these people. And this is obviously a great challenge. This is the evolution of the energy mix during the last decades, from 1800 to now, with some projection for the future, projection proposed by International Energy Agency. So you can see that at the very beginning, humanity was using only biomass. Biomass that means wood and charcoal mainly. Then we had coal in black, then oil in blue, then gas in red, and you add up then hydroelectricity, nuclear energy, and renewable, new renewable, especially wind and solar energy. So we are here. The three bars, 2030, 2040, 2050, are the basic projection in the do nothing scenario from International Energy Agency. It is clear that we cannot continue on this trend. The world cannot continue on this trend. Today, what is the energy mix? Today, the world is consuming 15.3 billion tons of oil equivalent of energy, which is split 30% oil, 21% gas, 27% coal, 5% nuclear, 2% hydro, 9% solid biomass, 1% modern bioenergy, and 5% renewable. This is the energy mix of today. And this will normally evolve drastically in the future, where we could see renewable part increasing substantially, while oil, gas, and coal will decrease substantially. For the final energy consumption, obviously we have not the same figure. We are going from 15.3 billion tons of oil equivalent to 10.6 billion tons of oil equivalent, simply because in the final consumption, we have electricity, which is not a primary energy. And to produce electricity, you have to produce it through industrial facilities like power plant, which all have an efficiency factor which is much less than 100%. And this is the reason why we end up with a figure here which is much lower than for primary energy. Second point we can mention is you can see that the final consumption, we can say that it's more or less split 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 into industry, transport, and building. Some words, some figures that should be kept in mind for the year 2022. 8 billion people, average GDP, because I will talk about GDP just after. GDP means gross domestic product. It's an indication of the wealth of the country. Average GDP in purchasing power parity for the world is a bit more than $20 per capita. So this figure has the one for 2022, so they are a bit less than for 2023. 15 billion tons, okay. If you divide this by the number of people, we end up with about 1.9 tons of oil equivalent per capita. CO2 energy, 34 billion tons of CO2. And if we divide this CO2 energy, an average CO2 emission per capita, we end up with 4.3 tons of CO2 per capita. It means that you and me, in average, on a world average, we emit 4.3 tons of CO2 per year today. An important thing to keep in mind is that energy is perfectly correlated to global economy, which is illustrated on this slide here, where you have on the horizontal axis the world GDP in terms of purchasing power parity in dollar of the year 2023, and on the vertical axis, the primary energy consumption. And you can see that there is a correlation which is almost perfect. The same for oil production versus the world GDP, where we can see evidently the impact of external geopolitical events. Also, a way to illustrate this correlation is to see a kind of a map of positioning of various countries by their GDP per capita and their primary consumption per capita. And you can see that the lower is GDP per capita, the lower is consumption of primary energy per capita, and vice versa. So if we take some example, USA is here. So a bit more than $80,000 per capita in terms of GDP, and consumption per capita of a bit less than 7 tons of oil equivalent. The first country by primary energy consumption, not a surprise, you have China number 1, United States number 2, in terms of billion tons of oil equivalent. The classification is not the same, obviously, if you reason in terms of nominal value and value per capita. China is not the number 1, but you can see that a number of countries are consuming a quite high amount of energy per capita, and all these countries, they should make some efforts to reduce that. So let's see now what could be the various scenarios we could envision for the future. And I am making reference here to the work done by International Energy Agency. They just published in November and October their new report for the year 2024, and there are three scenarios. The stated policy scenarios, more or less the scenario corresponding to the business as usual. We do not do more than we did before. The APS is the announced pledges scenario, is a scenario whereby we consider that all the commitments made by all the countries in the world through the various COP, Conference of the Parties, are realized, which is not guaranteed 100%, obviously. So this is the second scenario. And the third scenario is a rather more theoretical scenario, net zero emission scenario by 2050. And the assumption is that net emission of CO2 in the atmosphere are equal to zero by 2050. So this is an illustration of the steps, the do-nothing scenario and the APS scenario. You can see that if we continue as usual, we continue to increase our consumption, internal consumption, by increasing nevertheless the use of renewables. In the APS scenario, we are succeed more or less to limit the primary energy consumption, to stabilize it until the year 2050, which is better, but which is not enough to end up with a 1.52 degrees Celsius. In terms of CO2 emission, you have the picture here. So in the step scenario, we managed to decrease a bit the CO2 emission due to the fact that we reduce the use of fossil and we increase the use of renewable. But this is not enough, again, to end up with the objective in terms of temperature. In the APS scenario, we are declining much more rapidly this emission of CO2. In terms of energy demand per capita in the APS scenario, you can see that in this scenario, we decrease the consumption per capita of primary energy. And this is a net zero emission scenario where the objective is to end up to almost zero for the net emission in 2050, which correspond to this scheme regarding the consumption of primary energy, where you can see that the fossil energy are decreasing massively, especially coal. Coal is a bad pupil in the school, I would say, and quite extensive progress of renewable energy. But this scenario, is it feasible or not? This is a big question. 10 first country by CO2 emission, which is not a surprise, like for energy consumption, China number 1, US number 2. And per capita, the same comment we can make as we made for the primary energy consumption per capita. So various measures in order to limit this negative effect of CO2 emission, efficiency, implementing a carbon pricing, which is a quite difficult exercise. CCUS means carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which objective is to limit the emission of CO2, the net emission of CO2 in industrial facilities, increasing massively renewables, accelerating nuclear, which has an interest to emit very few CO2, changing the behavior of people, limiting or avoiding the subsidies on fossil energy, which are traditional in a number of countries today, in Middle East, in Venezuela, in Russia, etc., etc. Reducing the impact of methane emission for oil and gas activity, and stopping the new coal facilities. So these are a certain number of measures that could be envisioned. So the COP, last one was Dubai, where a certain number of decisions were taken, especially to increase the monetary financial envelope to help, I would say, the emergent countries to mitigate the effect of the energy of the climate change. And currently, there is a COP29 in Baku. Question is, what will be sorted out from this meeting? A point is important is to mention that for the next years to come and next decades to come, electricity will become more and more important. It is an easy final product for developing the economy. But the electricity for the time being is coming mainly from fossil energy through thermal plant. The idea is to increase quite a lot the electricity coming from renewable energy, with obviously capacity factors which are not the same for the various sources of electricity production. For instance, you have geothermal and nuclear, which have the best capacity factors, 75%. Then you have coal, bioenergy, gas. The point is that for renewable wind energy and solar PV, the capacity factors are much less important due to the intermittency factor. The projection is the following. If we are translating, I would say, the use of the production and the consumption of electricity in the decades to come into primary energy, it is clear that you see we will increase drastically the weighting factor of electricity generation for electricity production in terms, again, in primary energy compared to other sources. You can see the yellow part will increase quite a lot. This is due, in fact, to the carbon intensity of electricity production, which are different country per country. If we are looking at the world average, we are at the level of 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour produce of electricity. But you can see it is quite different if you compare the different countries. France is very well positioned thanks to its nuclear park. There is a challenge and a dilemma for the oil and gas industry in this context, because you can see in the various publication that there are still a lot of reserves and resources for coal, for oil, and for gas. But if we are looking at the effect of oil, gas, and coal production in terms of CO2 emission, that has consequences for the CO2 emission in the atmosphere, because again, these CO2 emissions are coming mainly from the combustion of fossil energy. So if you are willing, you see, if you make the calculation on the opposite side, if we are starting from the maximum of CO2 emission, we have to work with to end up with 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius increase of temperature in the year 2100 compared to the pre-industrial situation. It means that the industry will never produce all the reserves and resources which are underground for oil, gas, and coal. This is one of the consequences of this reasoning. And obviously, that can raise difficulties for companies who are mainly intensifying their work on to develop new oil and gas and coal reserves. The most important problem is coming from coal. Oil consumption will continue to decrease, but not for the next decade to come, probably because the world has still need oil and gas. Gas can have more or less a better, brilliant future because gas can replace coal in a central in thermal plant because gas is emitting twice less CO2 per kilowatt hour produced compared to coal. So these are the main comment we can make based on this diagram. Okay, so renewable are nice, but they are also they are characterized by some constraints, in particular the land use dedicated to this kind of technology. Obviously, a nuclear power plant is taking less hectares and superficies than a wind farm, than a hydropower plant, than a solar farm. Alors, renewable, I will go rather fast about it, just focusing on the most important aspect. Renewable power capacity, it's a good point. They are increasing on a regular basis, knowing that hydropower is still very important, has still a very important role in the installed capacity. Then you have wind onshore, sorry. Wind onshore is very much limited for the time being due to economic constraints, but it might also increase a bit. Solar PV photovoltaic is very important. Solar CSP less important, etc., etc. So you can see we have a regular increase of these installed capacities. Now, if we exclude hydropower, we have another picture with a nice vision of the development of installed capacity, mainly coming from wind onshore and from solar photovoltaic, which is a good point. Knowing that, nevertheless, that as we said before, as a capacity factor for wind onshore and wind and solar photovoltaic are much less interesting than for instance, a nuclear plant, and which represent a big difference. We will talk about intermittency a bit later. Cost and investment. Characteristic of renewable is that there has been a very important increase in cost reduction for wind energy and photovoltaic, which is illustrated here on this slide. There are some more details which I will skip later. Investment, you can see on this slide that it is also a forecast from International Energy Agency. There is obviously a global boost for clean energy investment compared to fossil fuel, and you can see clearly on this slide whatever are the various scenarios. If we are looking at the APS scenarios, you can see that the investment for fossil fuel are declining, and investment for renewable clean energy in general are increasing quite a lot. And we are talking here about there is a mistake here. It's $1.4 trillion. We are talking about a trillion US dollar per year. And to make a comparison for year 2023, the years before, the investment dedicated to oil and gas exploration and production were quite important, as they reach about more than $700 billion. Now we are in a situation where the investment dedicated to renewable are more important than the investment dedicated to oil and gas exploration and production. Intermittency. Intermittency is characterized by the capacity factors for the various for the various technologies. And you can see that obviously solar PV and wind have capacity factors which are less interesting than for traditional, I would say, technologies like gas, coal, and nuclear, and hydroelectricity. And this is due specifically this is due to the intermittency phenomena, which is illustrated here. It is a typical winter daily demand for electricity in Europe. So where you have during the 24 hours of the day the increase of demand during the day with a peak and just in the hours 18, 19, 20 hours. And during this period of time, obviously you don't have sun, so you don't have energy. So you have to compensate the lack of energy by a backup. Backup, so that implies storage system, to develop energy storage system, which is a big challenge. We have see some picture about some specific systems. This is an example of one of the biggest lithium-ion battery in South Australia, built by Tesla in Neoen. And the backup can be provided by a combined cycle gas turbine, for instance, which is a technology well efficient and which will continue to be used to generate electricity. Very short word regarding the various sort of energy. So hydropower, this is a question, but maybe during the conversation, some of you can give me the answer. What dam is it? Okay, so you have a picture here. What dam is it? The principle of hydroelectric dam. The objective of this slide is to show that the maximum power delivered by this kind of device, and it is the same also for wind turbines and other technologies. The power is a function of the speed of the flow, power free. So that explains the fact that when the higher is the speed of the flow, the higher is the power of the device. China is a top leader in terms of hydropower generation evolution, as you can see here. Wind energy, some pictures. Gigantism, giant elements. The same as before. For a windmill, you see the power of the windmill is a function of the speed of the flow at the power free. And if you are taking into account all the various losses of energy during the life cycle of wind turbines, in fact, you end up with 25% capacity factors for the wind turbine. Photography of the competition of the situation of installed wind power capacity in the world. So China is number one. China is number one, clearly. It's the blue bar. Then United States number two. And it is also characteristic to see the perfect regularity of the installed capacity. Some example, some pictures about this industry. Logistics. So for the offshore wind farm, you have several concepts: monopile, jacket, floating. But when you are going to floating, it's more and more expensive. So the economics of this technology is at stake. This is one of the new rotor which will be used for the Saint-Nazaire project in France. 750 tons, 12 megawatts for the windmill. And this is a very strange new concept which has been developed by a Norwegian company, but it's not yet operational, I believe. Solar is a champion of long-term energy champion. If we are able to control quite well all this energy, we have solved all the problem of humanity. Because you remember that the world need, in terms of energy, about 15 billion tons of oil equivalent, and if we use a capacity conversion factor of 17%, we have access to 22,000 billion tons of oil equivalent. For the solar energy technology, China is number one, United States number two, the same as for wind. And it's interesting to note here also you have a perfect regularity in the increase, and the installation of new farms, new solar farms are quite important. Solar panels in China. So different market. I am going a bit faster now because time is passing. Solar market. For the photovoltaic technology, you have two main concepts. For the solar technology, sorry, you have two main concepts. The solar photovoltaic, based mainly on the crystalline silicon technology, where you have here the value chain from the purified silicon to systems, to final systems to be installed. Some example, in Qatar, which is a gas country, they are also developing some new renewable energy project, in particular PV photovoltaic plant. I visited this one 1.5 years ago, 80 megawatt power. So it is an example of this facility. It's based at west of Doha in Al Qarsa. Another example for a smaller installation, 28 megawatt in Kazakhstan, South Kazakhstan. Another technology is concentrated solar power. So this technology is mainly comparable to a traditional power plant, because you concentrate the sun power at the top of this tower here, and you create high heat in this tower, which warm quite a lot fluid which is moving in the plant, and then you create like I would say thermal plant, thermal plants. You create a high pressure vapor, and you run a turbine which run an alternator. So this picture is from Noor Power Station in Morocco, close to Ouarzazate. This is the main principle. And you have also here thermal energy storage plant, which are full of molten salt. They act also as a kind of storage facilities. Biomass is important. So you have mainly two types of biomass. One part is to be fed with to be mixed with gasoline, and the other one to be mixed with diesel. So we are here talking about ETBA and VOME. Now we are using, I would say, biomass of second and third generation. We do not any longer use first generation biomass, which could be in competition with feeding the people. Okay, so here you have an illustration of conventional biofuel and future approaches where for the next future, industry is working on microalgae biofuels. And also, we can say that Europe, they have fixed some target regarding biofuel production. Okay, biomass. I am going rather fast now. Methanization. So biogas and biomethane are being developed in the countryside, and that can be locally interesting to generate natural gas or methane to be used in power plant, for instance. And geothermal energy are located in certain specific countries, but I would say their contribution in terms of energy mix is very limited, like it is for the marine energy. Because today you have two main projects delivering a bit more than 500 megawatt installed capacity in the world. The one is in France. First one is in France. The second one is in South Korea, and the other projects are more for the future. But in fact, the capacity factor are not very high, and the costs are very, very, very high. Okay, let's have a word on the criticality of mineral materials. I mentioned to you that before that energy transition will need more and more quantities for mineral materials, and specific metals, and also rare earth elements. And on this slide, you have a compilation of what could be the risk attached to this problematic, where every product is positioned in terms of its geological risk and its geopolitical risk. When we talk about geopolitical risk, for instance, you see, when we talk about cobalt, you know that maybe that 85% of cobalt production is coming from Democratic Republic of Congo. You have China also, which is very at the top level in terms of production and refining of a certain number of products. So that has to be taken into consideration in terms of access to this mineral material. You have here a list of material which are very important for the energy transition. This is a Piea Ogo mine, internal Mongolia. Dismantlement, I will skip it. A zoom on nuclear energy, which is one of the technology which, despite some concern about number of elements, in particular waste management and potential accident, which normally should be well controlled by the engineers and the companies which are involved in it. In fact, the nuclear energy could represent an important element in the energy transition in view of the fact that it doesn't emit any CO2 in the atmosphere. For the time being, you see that we have in the world a capacity of about a bit less than 400 gigawatts. And for the time being, today, in 2022, the nuclear electricity represent 10% of the overall electricity production in the world, and this percentage could be increased if we are willing to contribute more to the energy transition. Some picture about power plants, nuclear power plant in France and in China. The future, we are talking about small modular reactors, which are more flexible, less powerful, but more flexible. This is the one that is developed in France, New World. And on the longer term, we talked about the fusion reaction with the ITER project in France, in Cadarache, with a number of countries which are involved in this project. And you have certain number of countries which are working on this technology, in particular in China and in Korea. Here you have a picture of a reactor called Artificial Sun, where they managed to create plasma for 20 seconds at you need quite high temperature, greater than 100 million degrees. So it's a technology which is very, very sharp. Mobility, liquid hydrocarbons are very, very nice in terms of capacity and compactness, in terms of energy to be delivered by volume and by weight. The challenge for the new technology like hybrids, batteries, hydrogen is, and I will just limit my comment to this, is to reduce quite a lot the weight of the storage part of it, for batteries, for hydrogen, for instance, to be sure about the safety, the security, and also to reduce the cost, which for the time being are still rather high. This is a challenge today of the energy transition in the transport sector. And obviously, if we are talking about electrical vehicle, it is obviously interesting only when you get electricity from a decarbonized source of energy. And finally, I will skip the subsidies subject, just to talk about cost price of electricity produced by various types of power plant. I will terminate on this one. So it is interesting to look at the cost price of all these various technologies, including what is at stake in the energy transition. And you have here a comparison of various technology, traditional technology compared with renewable technology in terms of cost of electricity production cost. We do not talk about taxes and so on and so forth, distribution cost. And you have this criteria expressed in euro per megawatt hour. So you have here the comparison between the various technology, including CapEx, investment, OpEx, operating cost, and fuel cost. Obviously, the fuel cost is zero for renewable, except for biomass. And you can see that there is a big variety of difference of cost between the various technologies. Nuclear is rather expensive. Wind onshore and solar PV utility, they are now economically viable on their own. Solar CSP is still very, very expensive. You can see the level here, etc., etc. And coal could be still interesting, because in certain countries you have also access to coal, which is very, very cheap, especially in China and India. And this slide here is comparing the technical cost without any tax, without any penalty on CO2, because this technology, some of them are emitting CO2, some of them are not emitting CO2. And if we include a penalty on CO2, you have here two assumptions. One assumption of $25 per ton of CO2 and one assumption at $100 per ton of CO2. You can see that the difference is rather important, especially for the coal technology. And if the coal technology had to pay a penalty on their CO2 emission, coal could be excluded from the energy mix. This is one of the conclusions we can draw here. And also the cost of renewable might continue to decrease a bit, but not so much now, because big efforts have been made during the last 10 years, sorry. And I terminate by this conclusion by saying, yes, zero carbon is something which is obviously useful and necessary for the humanity, but you understand that to achieve that, that will represent huge challenges, and it will not be done within the next 10 years. It needs time, because it's not possible to change the energy system of the world within 10 years' time. It's not possible at all. It will take time. But if everybody is making the necessary effort, we can achieve something which could be interesting in the next decades to come. And if you permit me, I just terminate my presentation right now. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here, Prof.
Alfred, is it okay? Maybe it was a bit long.
Yeah, we can have just a small quiz, which I'm going to post for people to be able to participate, but it was quite extensive and quite detailed. So for the listeners who are listening to us, we're just going to have a brief quiz, which you're going to just type the answers as per the presentation which was being done, and then we'll be able to proceed. So I'll just post the question, and then you'll type the answer.
Okay.
So climate change has an effect on global sea level rise, true or false? Somebody can chat.
I am looking at the conversation.
Yes. Yeah, quite responsive. So the next question I'm going to post is Prof had shared a list of different energy sources which have been used previously, and we had an early energy mix whereby in the start of humanity, and there is now one which is the current energy mix. So my question is, in the beginning of humanity, which were the basic primary, which one of these two, which I'm going to post, is one of the basic primary energy sources mix in the beginning of humanity? Waiting for responses. You can just type a number, either 1 or 2, one of the answers. Oh, the choices are in the answers, so you can choose one of them. Please choose one of them, either biomass or nuclear. Yeah. Yeah, quite responsive. And maybe, Prof, your comments regarding the energy mix, given that Kenya is one of the countries whereby we are planning to transit now to have a nuclear program. Maybe what's your outlook towards it, comparing to an advanced economy like France in terms of safety and also the return on investment on the nuclear project, briefly.
You want me to add some comments about the nuclear, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Kenya is a developing economy in Africa, and we're one of the developing nations. We currently plan to have one of a nuclear project in Kilifi, Mombasa,
Oh, okay.
and maybe, yeah.
Yeah, okay. At a worldwide level, I the nuclear industry should be developed in countries which have obviously the competencies, because nuclear is not something that you should treat, I would say, very simply. It's a complex technology with industrial aspects which are important, and with a safety aspect which are even more important. So this technology is a very good one. This is my personal opinion also. Very good one, because it is a technology where you can concentrate a very important amount of energy in a very small volume and mass. Okay, when you build a nuclear plant, you don't need too much space, and 1 ton of uranium can generate 10,000 tons of energy. So it's something which is important. And the second advantage, obviously, is that you do not emit any CO2 except during the phase of construction. But normally, the engineers, when they make comparison, they make comparison in a life cycle, all life cycle of the technology, and nuclear sector remain at the top of the ranking, in terms of CO2 emission. We can say it doesn't emit CO2 emission. The second aspect which is at stake also is the management of waste. But management of waste, you have several categories of waste: the low-level waste, medium-level waste, and high-level waste. Until now, the industries have been able to manage this by storing this waste on the earth. And there are some projects which are studied, including in Sweden and in France, to build specific project to store the waste underground in a specific mines, which have all the security and guarantee of security for the next century to come. And I mean, this could be a solution for the long term. Regarding the general aspect of nuclear industry, we have to remind that as from the year 1960, where nuclear industry was born, more or less, you had in the world 3 main accidents. Three Mile Island in the States remained confined within the plant, so with no consequences outside. And the two others were dramatic, Chernobyl and Fukushima. Chernobyl was due to the misconception of the techniques of the design. Fukushima was due to the tsunami. So And for this three incident, the number of human victims, I would say it was not very high compared to what you can find in road accidents and this kind of thing. But it is clear that there is a high concern regarding long-term effect of radiation and so on and so forth. So if this industry is continue to be controlled on the right-hand side, I think we could have confidence about it. And we know that it's not easy to have this confidence, and many people are against, but it could be, frankly, a solution to improve the energy mix in terms of energy transition. Now, again, you have several countries which are willing to develop nuclear plants. China, not to mention it, has a program to build about 30 new nuclear plants close to the sea in their country. So China has really, in my view, a positive vision of the future with their the development of wind energy and solar energy also. I'm not sure that I don't know exactly what is going on in Africa, in certain countries in Africa.
Okay.
But maybe in Africa, nuclear should not be really the priority. In Africa, in certain countries in Africa, I think that solar energy could be a good mean to optimize the energy mix in all this country. And again, nuclear energy should be controlled by I would say high technology and competencies in terms of people who are dealing with this kind of project, which is at stake.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those comments. So I'm going to open the microphones briefly. So we'll just request for at least 2 or 3 participants. You can use the raise hand feature to raise your hand so it can be able to select you to ask the question. After that, we will close. So we have our general manager Wanjiko Manyara who is on the call. Wanjiko, proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mungai. I hope I'm audible, and thank you so much, Professor, for that wonderful, extensive information. Just going back to the question about nuclear, we do have, at least in Kenya, a nuclear power agency, and there's a lot of research that's been done, etc. And of course, you're right about it shouldn't be taken lightly, much as it's clean because of the waste matters. But on the other side, we also have not just solar, but also coal. So what's your thought, and just to use your words, should countries position themselves, particularly developing countries, to transition to the renewable energy which is available at a given time, even as we transit to cleaner forms? So in this case, I'm speaking to coal that's available, because there are clean coal technologies compared to, let me use quote unquote, the risk of nuclear and the expertise and the expense. In addition to our geothermal, which, as you may know, we have in abundance. I think we are the largest generators of geothermal electricity, I believe, in Africa, and we are actually providing the same resource and expertise to DRC. So what are your thoughts on, let's use what we have and can afford and what's accessible as we transition to cleaner forms, but having coal in mind as an alternative to nuclear, which would take a bit of time, and where in terms of environmental management of the waste, it is still even a concern for developed jurisdictions. Thank you.
Yeah, it is actually the duty of each government of each country to define their energy transition program, and each country, they have their own advantages, they have their own preferences. and each country in Africa, I believe, also are participating in the various conference of the party worldwide. You talked about coal. Yes, in certain countries in the world, coal is still a quite interesting resources because, generally speaking, it's rather cheap to exploit. So there is a kind of dilemma here also. It is the duty of and the responsibility of the government to define their own strategy. Obviously, nobody is willing to impose whatsoever in terms of defining a long-term strategy for energy transition to any kind of country. Let's have a look, for instance, well, I talk about China. China is they have an important program for energy transition, and they are developing all kind of new energy. They have a program to limit their coal plants in the next decades to come. So apparently. So it's going in the right way. If we are looking at India, for instance, India, they have a completely different position. India has a project to develop, rather importantly, their coal industry in the future, because they apparently they don't have too many other alternatives, and that has to be taken into consideration, obviously. So again, it's up to each country to define their policy with having in the mind the objective of reducing the emission of CO2 in the atmosphere, because it's a game which should be taken into consideration by all the country. Even you see in France, for instance, you have always people criticizing the policy of energy transition of the government, but in France, we are one of the country emitting less CO2 in the world. So you have a certain reaction which are not really comprehensible at the end of the day. Now, you talked about nuclear energy. Can you? I don't know. I don't know very well what is the situation in Kenya. But you said you have a nuclear plant in Kenya.
No, not a plant. An agency that has.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's. Yeah. So, but it's a lot of research that's been done. With a view of. Can I say having our ducks in a row in terms of then having it as a renewable source of clean.
Hello. I can't hear
clean
you.
Energy supply. Sorry, I lost my internet a bit. But to be honest, and I agree with you, we have more in abundance than. And I guess I agree. Sorry, it is just getting our policies right so that we don't borrow what is not compatible with our situation, and perhaps harness what is available in abundance, like solar. We also have wind in abundance. We have coal, and we have the benefit of having biodiversity and a program that is meant to reforest, hence use whatever is being emitted to go to what we are calling the forests, which are really our natural carbon sinks.
Okay.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Since there are no hands raised, we believe that it was quite an interactive and informative session. And this is the beginning to many. We'll be hosting Prof again on a separate session. And we look forward to you sending your feedback and comments on the same. And we welcome you all to attend the second webinar, which I'll be able to send the dates. And we welcome you all. With those few remarks, we come to the end of the webinar, and thank you so much, Professor Christian. Maybe closing remarks before we end?
No, I mean, I also thank you very much, Alfred, to have given me the opportunity to exchange with your students.